"This can't be happening right now," shouted Adebayo Johnson, his voice bouncing off the marble walls of the 52nd floor at Johnson Global Enterprises. The billionaire CEO frantically paced his corner office, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as a convoy of sleek Mercedes vehicles pulled up to the building's entrance. The German delegation had arrived. And their official interpreter had just cancelled, a sudden illness that couldn't wait. In exactly 12 minutes, executives from Germany's most powerful automotive corporation would be sitting across from him, ready to finalize a $180 million manufacturing deal. $180 million that hinged entirely on flawless communication. "Mr. Johnson, I've contacted every translation service in Lagos," said Folake, his executive assistant, still clutching her phone. "No one can handle a negotiation of this scale on such short notice." Adebayo loosened his custom-tailored tie, feeling pressure build behind his temples. 25 years building this empire, and it could all crumble because of a language barrier. The Germans were notorious for their precision in business dealings. They would never accept Google Translate or hand gestures for a deal of this magnitude. That's when a gentle voice drifted from the corner of the room. "Excuse me, Mr. Johnson, but I speak fluent German." Every head turned toward Grace Ease, who had paused her cleaning routine to listen. The 26-year-old held a microfiber cloth in her hands, wearing the standard gray uniform of the janitorial staff. For 4 years, Grace had cleaned these executive floors, always quiet, always efficient, always invisible to the powerful people who walked these halls. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming. Folake was the first to break it with a nervous laugh. "Grace, this isn't the time for jokes. We're talking about an international deal worth more than most people see in a lifetime." Adebayo studied her carefully, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "You speak German?" "German, Dutch, and some Austrian dialects," Grace replied steadily, meeting his gaze without wavering. "I studied European linguistics at the University of Lagos before I started working here." At 26, Grace had never imagined that 4 years of cleaning these executive suites would prepare her for a moment like this. But during all those hours polishing conference tables, she had absorbed every conversation, every strategy, every move these executives made. Especially Folake's moves. Folake's expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "Adebayo, you cannot be serious. A janitor handling the most crucial meeting of the year." But desperation was clouding Adebayo's judgment. Something in Grace's posture, the quiet confidence in her voice, made him pause. "Prove it," he said abruptly. "Say something in German." Grace took a breath and spoke in flawless German, her pronunciation crisp and professional. "Es ist mir ein Ehre, Sie hier zu treffen, und wir hoffen, dass an sehr Zusammenarbeit für beide Seiten vorteilhaft sein wird." Even though Adebayo couldn't understand a word, he could hear the natural fluency and authority in her tone. "What did you say?" he asked, still processing what he'd just heard. "It's an honor to meet you here, and we hope our cooperation will be mutually beneficial," Grace translated. "It's a respectful standard business greeting in German corporate culture." Folake crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. "Adebayo, think about what you're doing. What will the Germans think when they see you've brought a cleaning lady to an executive negotiation?" At that moment, a memory flashed through Grace's mind. 8 months ago, she had found Folake in the executive washroom, speaking harshly on the phone about that girl who thinks she belongs in important meetings. Grace had pretended not to hear, but every word had burned into her memory. For what felt like eternity, Adebayo stared at Grace. There was something in her eyes, a deep intelligence, a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with how everyone treated her daily. For 4 years, she had cleaned these rooms, listened to these conversations, absorbed more about the company's operations than many executives ever would. "You have 15 minutes to make yourself presentable," Adebayo finally said, ignoring Folake's shocked expression. "Find something appropriate and meet me in the conference room." As Grace hurried out, Folake whispered urgently, "You've lost your mind completely. When this backfires, it'll destroy everything we've built. But Adebayo wasn't listening. For the first time in years, he was about to discover that the most valuable people are sometimes the ones hiding in plain sight. What none of them knew was that Grace had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone could imagine. And Folake, with all her arrogance and barely concealed prejudice, was about to learn that underestimating someone based on their job title can be the costliest mistake of all. 15 minutes later, when Grace returned to the conference room, the silence was immediate and profound. She had changed into a navy blazer borrowed from the receptionist, simple but professional. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she carried a leather portfolio like any other executive. "My word," muttered Kofi, the CFO, not bothering to hide his amazement. "Is that really the same person?" Folake didn't lower her voice when she whispered to her assistant, "You can dress up a street vendor, but underneath it's still the same person." The German delegation had arrived precisely on time. 5 immaculately dressed executives sat in the glass-walled conference room, speaking quietly among themselves in German while taking in the panoramic view of Lagos. Adebayo made the introductions, carefully choosing his words. "This is Grace Ease, our specialist in European business relations." The delegation leader, Herr Mueller, greeted Grace with a firm handshake. When she responded in perfect German, thanking him for the honor of the meeting and complimenting their punctuality, a virtue highly valued in German business culture, his eyebrows rose with genuine surprise and approval. For the first 20 minutes, Grace translated every nuance with surgical precision. Not just words, but cultural undertones, diplomatic implications, even subtle humor that made the Germans chuckle genuinely. The meeting flowed with an ease no one had expected. That's when Folake decided to strike. "Grace," she interrupted with a saccharine smile, "perhaps we should share with our guests your unique career journey at our company." Adebayo shot her a warning look, but Folake continued relentlessly. "It's just so inspiring to see someone reinventing themselves, moving up in the world, so to speak." The condescending tone was unmistakable. Grace felt that familiar weight of humiliation, the same feeling she'd carried since age 19, when she'd had to drop out of university to care for her sick father and work multiple jobs to support her family. "Life has a way of teaching us that opportunities can come from unexpected places," Grace replied calmly, maintaining her dignity as Herr Mueller watched the exchange with growing confusion. "But really, who would have thought that someone who was cleaning these very offices 4 years ago would be sitting at this table today?" Folake paused, letting the information sink in. "It truly shows how our company values diversity in all its forms." The silence that followed was crushing. Grace saw Herr Mueller's expression change subtly, not contempt, but an uncomfortable surprise that made her stomach clench. In German business culture, professional hierarchies were sacred. Adebayo quickly interjected, "What Folake means is that we value exceptional talent wherever we find it." But the damage was done. For the next 20 minutes, Grace felt the Germans' glances shift. They remained polite, still professional, but the natural flow was broken. She had become a curiosity, not a colleague. It was in that moment that something crystallized inside her. For 4 years, she had cleaned these rooms while executives discussed strategies, closed deals, and made decisions that moved millions. She had absorbed every word, every tactic, every mistake they made. Especially Folake's mistakes. Like the time Folake had inflated project costs to pocket the difference. Or when she had stolen credit for a brilliant marketing campaign developed by a junior employee who was later terminated. Or when she had used confidential bidding information to benefit her husband's competing company. Grace had seen everything, heard everything, and most importantly, she had documented everything. The meeting ended with a polite but lukewarm handshake. The Germans promised to carefully consider the proposal, diplomatic language for "we'll probably find someone else." As the delegation left, Folake couldn't hide her satisfaction. "Well, that was educational," she said, organizing her papers with exaggerated precision. "Perhaps next time we should be more transparent about our team's qualifications from the start." Adebayo was visibly furious, but before he could respond, Grace stood calmly. "Folake," she said, her voice soft but carrying new authority, "Herr Mueller mentioned something interesting before he left." Folake raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what was that?" "He said he was impressed with my linguistic abilities, but puzzled by our company's internal dynamics." Grace paused, letting the word settle. "He asked if I could call him later to clarify some aspects of our presentation." Folake's expression changed slightly. "What aspects?" "Mainly why the person responsible for translation wasn't introduced as the lead negotiator, considering that in German business culture, the language specialist typically holds primary authority in international deals." Grace smiled softly. "He said he'd like to better understand our organizational structure before making any final decisions." Folake's face went pale as she grasped the implications. For 4 years, Grace had been invisible. But invisibility, she was about to discover, can be the most powerful weapon of all, especially when you've been watching, learning, and preparing for the perfect moment to step into the light. 2 hours later, Grace was back in her gray uniform, pushing her cart through the executive corridors. But this time, every movement was calculated. For 4 years, she had mentally mapped every important conversation, every whispered secret, every document carelessly left on desks. "Look who's back where she belongs," Folake announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, chatting with Yemi from accounting. "After that embarrassing performance today, at least we all know where people really stand." Grace continued her work, but her mind was recording every word. Folake had no idea that during these 4 years, Grace had discovered financial irregularities, witnessed discriminatory practices, and most importantly, collected evidence of contract manipulation. "You know what bothers me most?" Folake continued, clearly performing for Yemi's benefit. "Adebayo actually thought a janitor could save a $180 million deal. As if 4 years of mopping floors qualified her to sit with real executives." That's when Grace's phone buzzed discreetly. A message from an unknown number, but the sender was clear: Herr Mueller. "Ms. Ease, I would like to speak with you privately about your company and potential future opportunities. Could we meet tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Goethe Café on Victoria Island? I have a proposition that might interest you." Grace's heart raced. This wasn't just about translation. During the meeting, she had realized that Herr Mueller was evaluating not only her linguistic skills but her business acumen, her composure under pressure, her potential. That night, in her modest apartment in Surulere, Grace opened a file on her laptop that she had been building for 3 years. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Every company has its secrets, and 4 years of invisibility had given her access to information that could shake foundations. The file, labeled Johnson Global Irregularities, contained 78 pages of meticulously documented evidence. Printed emails Folake thought she had deleted, financial records showing systematic bid rigging, and most damning of all, proof that Folake had deliberately sabotaged contracts with companies owned by minorities. The next morning at 10 a.m. sharp, Grace arrived at Goethe Café wearing a simple but elegant outfit she had purchased with her savings. Herr Mueller was waiting, accompanied by a sophisticated woman who introduced herself as Dr. Ingrid Weber, their Vice President of African Operations. "Miss Ease," Herr Mueller began in English, then switched naturally to German. "Yesterday I observed not just your linguistic fluency, but something far more valuable, your grace under unwarranted pressure." Dr. Weber leaned forward. "Our company is expanding operations across West Africa. We need someone who understands both German precision and African business dynamics. Someone who has observed how business really works from the inside. And someone," Herr Mueller added with a knowing smile, "who has the dignity to maintain professionalism when others lack it entirely." For 2 hours, Grace discussed market strategies, cultural differences in negotiations, and subtly mentioned irregularities she had observed at competing companies. When Dr. Weber slid a business card across the table, Grace read, "Ease International Business Solutions, with an annual retainer that was 6 times her current salary. "Consider our offer," said Herr Mueller, standing. "But we have one specific request. We'd like you to help us investigate certain discrepancies we've discovered in Johnson Global's bidding practices. There appears to be evidence of practices that violate international trade regulations." Grace held the card with steady hands. For 4 years, she had been treated as invisible. Now 2 of Europe's most respected business leaders were offering her not just a job, but a partnership. "There's an emergency board meeting at Johnson Global tomorrow," Dr. Weber said quietly. "We've submitted a formal complaint about contractual irregularities. It might be worth your while to attend." That night, Grace called her mother. "Mama, remember how you always said that patience is a wise woman's greatest strength?" "Of course, my daughter. Why do you ask?" "I think I finally understand what you meant." As she hung up, Grace gazed out at the Lagos skyline. Tomorrow, Folake and everyone at Johnson Global would discover that 4 years of invisibility had created something far more dangerous than a resentful employee. They had forged a strategist who knew every weakness, every secret, every lie that company held. And unlike the executives who had judged her by her uniform, Grace had learned that true power comes from observing, planning, and striking at the exact moment when your opponents least expect it. The next morning would change everything. The invisible would become unmistakable. And justice, delayed but not denied, would finally have its day. The boardroom at Johnson Global was thick with tension the next morning. Adebayo had called an emergency meeting after receiving an official complaint from the German delegation about serious contractual irregularities that could trigger a federal investigation. Folake strutted in confidently, her bright red power suit and clicking heels announcing her authority. She had spent all night preparing her defense, certain she could blame everything on the unqualified janitor Adebayo had foolishly trusted. "Well," Folake began, addressing the 8 board members, "I assume we're here to discuss yesterday's disaster. As I warned, putting an unqualified employee in a crucial negotiation was reckless beyond measure." The door opened silently. Grace entered wearing an impeccable charcoal suit, not borrowed, but purchased with her advance from the German company. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confidence of someone who had finally found her place. "Apologies for being late," Grace said calmly, taking a seat beside Adebayo. "I was preparing some crucial information for this meeting." Falake's face twisted with barely contained rage. "With all due respect, Adebayo, why is she here? This is a board meeting." "She's here," Adebayo replied icily, "because the German delegation specifically requested her presence to address the allegations they've made." Grace opened her laptop with deliberate movements. "Herr Mueller contacted me yesterday with specific concerns about Johnson Global's contracting practices. They claim to have discovered evidence of bid manipulation and systematic discrimination." "That's absurd." Folake exploded, her voice rising. "What kind of evidence could a janitor possibly have about executive operations?" The smile that crossed Grace's face was gentle but devastating. "The kind of evidence you collect when you're invisible for 4 years, and people speak freely in front of you as if you don't exist." Falake's expression shifted. The first spark of genuine fear flickered in her eyes. Grace connected her laptop to the projector. The first image was an internal email from Folake, dated 10 months ago. This email, sent to Zenith Corporation, contains confidential information about our competitors' bid, information that was used to undercut them by exactly 0.5%. The room fell silent. Folake tried to interrupt, but Grace continued relentlessly. "This document shows systematic overcharging of projects led by employees from certain ethnic backgrounds, forcing cancellations that were then blamed on their incompetence." The screen displayed spreadsheets, email chains, and audio recordings. For 4 years, Grace had documented every irregularity with the precision of a forensic accountant. "This is fabricated!" Folake shrieked, leaping to her feet. "She's manufacturing evidence for revenge because I exposed her true place in this company." Grace remained seated, unruffled. The recording I'm about to play was captured by our own security system 11 months ago. Falake's voice filled the room. We cannot allow these types of people to think they belong in executive positions. It's about maintaining proper standards. Falake's face drained of color. She remembered that conversation, a private discussion with Kofi about keeping the company appropriately represented. And this, Grace continued, displaying a new recording, is from 3 weeks ago when Folake instructed HR to lose applications from candidates with certain types of names. Dr. Funmi Adebayo, the board's longest-serving member, leaned forward with a grim expression. Folake, is this true? That's taken out of context, Folake stammered, sweat beading on her forehead. You don't understand the pressures I face maintaining company standards. Company standards, Grace said softly, include ethics, integrity, and compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws, all systematically violated over the past 2 years. Adebayo turned to Folake, his voice deadly quiet. You have 30 seconds to explain why you shouldn't be terminated for cause and reported to the authorities. Folake looked desperately around the table, searching for support. She found only disgust and disappointment. You're making a catastrophic mistake, she whispered, her voice cracking. She's just a bitter janitor who... She, Adebayo interrupted with finality, is our new Director of International Relations. And you're fired. The silence was absolute. Folake swayed slightly, processing that her 15-year career had ended in minutes. Security will escort you out, Adebayo continued. And given the severity of this evidence, we'll be forwarding everything to federal prosecutors. As security led Folake away, she shot Grace one final venomous look. You may have won today, but that doesn't change what you really are. Grace met her gaze with unwavering calm. You're absolutely right. I am exactly what I've always been, someone who watches, learns, and acts at the right moment. The difference is that now I'm finally where I belong. 3 months later, Grace Parker sat in her new corner office on the 50th floor, reviewing contracts with European partners. Her desk was covered with documents in German, Dutch, and English, negotiations that had already secured $320 million in new business. Through her window, she could see the Lagos skyline she had once observed only as an invisible cleaner. Now, as Director of International Relations, she had become one of Nigeria's most celebrated young executives. Her annual salary of $280,000 had provided her father with the best cardiac care available, and she was completing her MBA through an executive program at Lagos Business School. Across the city, Folake sat in a small apartment in Ikeja, surrounded by bills and rejection letters. The federal investigation had resulted in a $75,000 fine and a 7-year ban from executive positions in publicly traded companies. Her name had appeared in every major business publication as a cautionary tale of toxic leadership. That morning, she had seen Grace's photograph on the cover of Business Day magazine, smiling confidently with German executives under the headline, "The Translator Who Transformed International Business." Back at Johnson Global, the company had achieved record profits. During the quarterly board meeting, Adebayo announced exceptional results. Grace Ease didn't just save our German deal, she opened doors to markets we never imagined penetrating. Dr. Funmi Adebayo stood to address the room. In my 40 years in corporate Nigeria, I have rarely seen a transformation as remarkable as what Grace has brought to our company. She has proven that true talent recognizes no boundaries of class, background, or prejudice. As the room applauded, Grace remained modestly seated, remembering the woman who had once cleaned that same boardroom just 4 months earlier. That evening, in her renovated apartment in Ikoyi, Grace received a call from her mother. "My daughter, I saw your interview on Channel's TV. You spoke so beautifully about second chances and perseverance." "I learned from the best, Mama," Grace replied, smiling. "You always told me that people might try to diminish us, but they can never diminish what we know and what we're capable of achieving." During the television interview, Grace had been asked about Folake and whether she harbored resentment. Her response had been measured and elegant. "Folake gave me the greatest gift possible. She showed me exactly who I never wanted to become. Her arrogance and prejudice taught me that true leadership means lifting others up, not stepping on them." 2 weeks later, Grace stood at the University of Lagos, her alma mater, announcing the scholarship program she had created. No student should have to choose between family responsibilities and educational dreams, she told an audience of 400 emotional students. The Second Chance initiative, funded partly by her own salary, had already provided full scholarships to 15 students who had been forced to interrupt their studies due to financial hardship. Meanwhile, Folake watched the ceremony online from her small apartment, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, they weren't tears of self-pity, but of genuine regret. Grace returned to offices where she had once pushed a cleaning cart through the same corridors. Now, young professionals greeted her with respect, assistants sought her mentorship, and most importantly, she had become a champion for employees in operational roles who showed untapped potential. "You know what fascinates me most about this story?" Adebayo asked during a private conversation. "You could have used that information to destroy Folake personally. But you chose to focus only on her professional misconduct." Grace smiled softly. "The best victory isn't destroying someone. It's building something so extraordinary that it makes their attempts to diminish you completely irrelevant." Grace E's journey proved that authentic talent, unwavering dignity, and careful preparation can overcome any prejudice. She transformed 4 years of invisibility into the foundation of an extraordinary career, showing that sometimes the most powerful people are those you never notice, watching, learning, and preparing to shine. Folake had tried to humiliate her through prejudice and arrogance, but ultimately became the architect of her own downfall. Grace demonstrated that true leadership doesn't come from titles or privilege, but from the ability to recognize potential where others see only limitations. This story reminds us that talent and dignity always find their way to the top, no matter how many obstacles are placed in their path. Sometimes the most unlikely person in the room is exactly who you need to change everything. Please smash that like button, subscribe for more incredible stories, share this with someone who needs to hear that their moment to shine is coming. Because everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued for who they truly are.